Julian Vance had been married to Eleanor Thorne for 50 years. In those 5 decades, his body had become a roadmap of scars, from knives, bullets, and burns. Every single one was a consequence of his wife, Colonel Eleanor Thorne, the youngest and most promising officer at the command. Her position was unique, and she had a legion of enemies. Those who couldn't touch her directly came for him instead. Kidnapping, imprisonment, torture. It had become the grim routine of his married life. And every time, he survived, clinging to his profound love for her and the unwavering belief that she would come to his rescue. This time was different. 3 knife wounds gaped in his abdomen. He'd used his last ounce of strength to break free, dragging his blood-soaked body, crawling desperately toward the direction of their home on the Fort Belvoir base. A single thought consumed him: to see Eleanor one last time. As his vision blurred, he finally saw her, that familiar, slender figure in olive drab, standing at the mouth of a secluded alley not far from their house. A surge of relief washed over him. He tried to call her name, to force the sound from his throat, but it died on his lips. Because he saw her pinned against the wall by another man, their mouths locked in a devout, passionate kiss. Sebastian, Julian is just a shield, that's all. How could I ever fall for someone like him? With him in the picture, they'll never suspect you. The world tilted on its axis, then shattered. A shield, all of it. 50 years of her supposed affection, 50 years of his devotion, 50 years of agony endured for her sake, had been nothing more than an elaborate, cruel deception. She had never loved him. She married him, built a life with him, treated him with just enough kindness, all to push him into the spotlight, to make him a target. He was a human shield for the man she truly loved, Sebastian Cole. 50 years. She had deceived him for 50 long years. A tsunami of grief and despair swallowed him whole. The searing pain in his gut faded, dwarfed by the gaping, cavernous wound in his heart. Blood pumped from his body, staining the asphalt beneath him. His vision swam. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the silhouette of the 2 lovers, clinging to each other 3 yards away, as if they were the only 2 people in the world. And him? He was just a pool of anonymous blood, dying in an unknown corner, his love and faith utterly annihilated. Julian? Mr. Vance? A slightly anxious voice pulled him from the cold, suffocating memory of death. Julian's eyes flew open. He gasped for air, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He wasn't on the cold ground staring at Eleanor's uncaring back. He was in a familiar room, the walls adorned with red banners and award plaques. The air smelled of chalk dust and faint sweat. This was the rehearsal hall for the U.S. Army Arts Command. From the 70s. He turned his head stiffly. Standing before him was a middle-aged woman in a practical suit common in the early 70s, her hair cut in a short, neat bob. It was Director Roberts. Julian, are you daydreaming? Director Roberts looked at his pale face, her concern tinged with exasperation. I'm going to ask you one last time. This opportunity to study abroad, recommended by the command, is incredibly valuable. A scholarship to the Moscow Conservatory. You know what that means for your future. Are you absolutely certain you want to give it up? Study abroad? Moscow? Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. A wild, unbelievable thought clawed its way into his mind. He looked down at his hands. They were long, pale, and unmarred by the hideous scars he knew so well. The calendar on the wall read, in clear, bold print, October 12th, 1974. He was reborn? Back in 1974. He was 20 years old again. In his last life, in this very office, Director Roberts had asked him the same question. Back then, his world had revolved around his new wife, Eleanor. He couldn't bear the thought of leaving her for even a day. Without a moment's hesitation, he had thrown away the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to elevate his art to the world stage. But now, Julian's fingernails dug into his palms. The sharp pain was a stark reminder that the 50 years of soul-crushing deception and his cold, lonely death were not a dream. The marriage he had dedicated his life to was, from start to finish, a monstrous joke. He was Julian Vance, a conductor who had once commanded stages with brilliance. He was no one's property, and he would certainly no longer be anyone's shield. A resolve he had never known surged from the depths of his soul. No, Director Roberts. I'm not giving it up. I want to go to Moscow. Director Roberts blinked, her surprise quickly melting into a gratified smile. Good. Excellent. Julian, I knew you weren't a fool. Your talent is exceptional. It would be a terrible waste. Don't worry. The command will handle all the arrangements. You leave at the end of the month. Use this time to prepare. Thank you, Director. Julian's gratitude was sincere, his mind perfectly clear. This time, he He would not be an appendage to anyone. He would not be a shield. He was Julian Vance, and he was going to live his own brilliant life. Leaving the Arts Command, Julian walked without hesitation to another place that would decide his fate, the county clerk's office. The clerk looked at him in disbelief when he said he was filing for divorce, especially from the renowned Colonel Eleanor Thorne. Mr. Vance, are you certain you wish to file for divorce from Colonel Thorne? I'm certain. Julian's voice was quiet, but his eyes held an unwavering resolve. The clerk sighed and handed him a stack of forms. As per regulations, you'll need to fill these out and submit them for review. Once approved, we will notify you and the colonel to come and receive the final decree. Julian took the pen and began to write, each stroke of the pen a farewell to the fool he used to be. After finishing the paperwork, he stepped out of the courthouse, the very air tasting of freedom. He hadn't walked far when the screech of tires echoed behind him. A warm, fair hand clasped his. Julian, I told you to wait for me at the command entrance. Why did you leave on your own? I couldn't find you. I thought something had happened. Do you have any idea how worried I was? Her voice was laced with such urgency, such genuine concern. The hand holding his was so warm, as if he were a priceless treasure she had almost lost. The old Julian would have melted, would have been overwhelmed by this display of affection and followed her home without a word. But now, Julian stood stiffly, letting her hold him, his heart a frozen landscape of irony. Was she really worried about him, or was she worried that her shield had been compromised, exposing her beloved Sebastian to danger? He didn't struggle, nor did he lean into her embrace as he once would have. He remained still, a statue devoid of emotion. Eleanor seemed to sense his strangeness. She loosened her grip, tilting her head to study his face, her brow furrowed. What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Julian lowered his gaze, avoiding her searching eyes. He shook his head, his voice low and raspy. I'm fine, just tired. Eleanor took his subdued demeanor as a sign of exhaustion from rehearsal and didn't press further. All right, get in the car. I'll make you some soup when we get home. The car moved smoothly down the road, an oppressive silence filling the space between them. Halfway home, they ran into a traffic jam and a commotion up ahead. That poor guy, look at that wreck. And the driver just took off. Isn't anyone going to help him? That's so dangerous. A crowd had gathered, murmuring with a mixture of pity and fear, but no one dared to approach. Eleanor's expression hardened. The soldier in her took over instantly. She slammed on the brakes. I'm going to check it out. Her voice was steady as she unbuckled her seatbelt. Ma'am, that car's about to explode. You'll get yourself killed, a well-meaning old man from a nearby car shouted, trying to stop her. Eleanor didn't pause. The line of her jaw was hard and determined. I'm a soldier. Saving people is my duty. With that, she pushed through the crowd and ran toward the smoking, mangled car without a second thought. Julian sat in his seat, watching her slender back charge headfirst into danger. This was Eleanor Thorne. The duty of soldier was etched into her very bones. But she was also the woman who had lied to him for 50 years. Up ahead, she was struggling to pry open the car door, leaning in to pull out the trap driver. But the moment she saw the victim's face, Julian saw it clearly. Eleanor's back, which never flinched even in the face of death, went rigid. Then, her voice, usually so calm, was suddenly laced with an uncontrollable tremor of panic. She screamed in his direction, Julian, come help me, quickly. It was a level of panic Julian had never seen in her. She had faced down countless dangerous missions, stared death in the face in firefights, and never once had she shown this kind of raw fear. He frowned, pushed open his door, and walked over. When he reached the wreck and saw the man pinned between the twisted steering wheel and the driver's seat, his heart felt like it was being pierced by 1,000 needles. Of course, pinned in the car was Sebastian Cole. No wonder she was acting like her world was ending. His hands trembling, he reached in and, together with Eleanor, struggled to pull the unconscious Sebastian from the wreckage. The very instant they dragged him clear, boom, the car exploded in a massive fireball. A scorching wave of heat and a powerful shock wave surged toward them like a tidal wave. In that split second, acting on pure instinct, Eleanor spun around, shielding Sebastian's body with her own, holding him tight. And Julian, standing just behind her, was violently thrown through the air by the force of the blast. In the last moment before darkness consumed him, Julian saw his wife clutching another man, utterly oblivious to him. He let out a low, soft laugh, and as he laughed, tears streamed down his face, mixing with the dirt and blood. Wasn't this the outcome he should have expected? The moment she chose to save Sebastian, the moment she lost her composure at the sight of his face, what was there left for him to hope for? to feel pain over. He didn't know how much time had passed. In a hazy stupor, Julian felt himself being moved onto a cold operating table. He could hear the blurred, urgent voice of a doctor. "Colonel Thorne, Mr. Vance is suffering from severe internal bleeding due to the blast trauma. His condition is extremely unstable. If we forcibly remove one of his kidneys from Mr. Cole right now, he will most likely die on this table." Then he heard that voice, the one he knew better than his own, now so cold it was cruel. It was Eleanor. "The transplant has to happen. Sebastian can't wait. Nothing can happen to him. Julian, he's a soldier's husband. This is a sacrifice he should be prepared to make. Sebastian can't wait. Nothing can happen to him. And what about Julian's life? Was it so insignificant that it could be sacrificed without a second thought?" A colossal wave of despair and devastation washed over Julian. He wanted to fight, to scream, but his body was shackled by an invisible force. The anesthesia rendered him immobile. He couldn't even lift a finger. He then faintly heard Eleanor's low, fervent prayer from outside. "Sebastian, you have to be okay. You have to." Every word was a razor-sharp icicle, shattering the last vestiges of his consciousness. Julian could no longer bear the onslaught. A surge of agony rose in his chest, and his world went black. When he awoke again, the familiar scent of antiseptic filled his nostrils. Julian slowly opened his eyes, the first sensation a tearing pain in his left side. He subconsciously reached down to touch it. Through the thick gauze, he could feel a distinct hollowness. His kidney was gone. To save Sebastian Cole, Eleanor had ordered his kidney to be taken while he was on the brink of death. "Julian, you're awake." A soft, gentle voice, full of worry, sounded beside his bed. Julian turned his head and saw Eleanor. She was sitting by his side, dressed in her crisp uniform, though the dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. "How do you feel? Does it hurt anywhere else?" She gently caressed his face, her eyes filled with pain and self-reproach. "I'm sorry. During the explosion, everything happened so fast. I didn't mean to save Sebastian first. I was just closer to him. I promise. I will never let you get hurt again. Never." Watching her performance, so sincere, so convincing, as if she loved him to the bone, Julian felt a chill creep up his spine. How could she be such a consummate actress? If he hadn't been reborn, if he hadn't personally witnessed her passionate kiss with Sebastian, if he hadn't experienced the despair of being abandoned by her, he would have fallen for it all over again. He would have drowned in the carefully constructed trap of her tenderness, believing she was madly in love with him. Tears slipped uncontrollably from the corners of his eyes, not from the physical pain, but for the man he used to be, deceived for 50 years, giving everything only to meet a tragic end. Seeing him cry, Eleanor panicked. She clumsily wiped his tears away with her fingertips, her voice even more gentle and urgent. "It hurts, doesn't it? Just hold on, I'll go get the doctor right now." She hurried out of the room. Watching her anxious back, Julian closed his eyes, forcing the tears to stop. A single thought grew in his mind like a wildfire, clear and resolute. This life, he had to get away from Eleanor Thorne. Forever. There would be no more connection between them, for all eternity. For the next few days, Eleanor seemed to pour all her guilt and energy into caring for Julian. She fed him soup, bathed him, and at night, she slept on a cot in the corner of his room, waking at the slightest sound he made. When his colleagues and superiors from the Arts Command came to visit, they all remarked on how deeply devoted Colonel Thorne was. But Julian just watched her silently, his heart a frozen wasteland. The more convincing her performance, the more bitterly ironic it all felt. This meticulous care was nothing more than a tactic to keep her shield in place. One afternoon, just after Eleanor had given Julian his medicine, the door to his room burst open. Her aide, Officer Miller, rushed in, looking frantic. He leaned in and whispered something urgently in her ear. Eleanor's face changed dramatically. The ceramic mug in her hand clattered to the floor, splashing warm water on her uniform trousers. Without a single word of explanation to Julian, she threw back his blanket and pulled him out of bed. "Let's go." Her voice was tight, a command that permitted no argument. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" The movement pulled at the wounds on his ribs, causing a sharp pain that made him break out in a cold sweat. Eleanor paid him no mind, practically dragging him out of the hospital, shoving him into a military jeep, and speeding away. The vehicle finally screeched to a halt outside an abandoned factory. "What have you brought me here for?" Julian clutched his aching side, a powerful sense of dread washing over him. Eleanor gripped his wrist tightly, her eyes fixed on the factory's dark interior. Her voice was suppressed, choked with anxiety. Listen, Julian, the people who are after me. They were supposed to go to the Arts Command to kidnap you. But they got the wrong person. They took Sebastian. He was wearing the same kind of rehearsal clothes as you. Julian felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. A chilling cold spread through his body. Of course, it was for Sebastian again. So, his voice was dry and trembling. You're going to trade me for him? It's the only way. Eleanor said breathlessly. Sebastian is innocent. We can't just leave him. Don't worry, I have my men positioned all around here. As soon as they make the exchange and let their guard down, my team will move in and rescue you. I swear I won't let anything happen to you. Another empty promise. In his past life, she had used words just like these to deceive him for 50 years. Before Julian could object, Eleanor shouted toward the factory. Listen up in there. You got the wrong man. I'm Eleanor Thorne. This is my husband, Julian Vance. Let the innocent civilian go. As the words left her mouth, she shoved Julian forward. He stumbled into the factory shadows. Almost simultaneously, a bound and gagged Sebastian was pushed out from the inside. Just as the two men passed each other, Eleanor's hidden soldiers burst from their positions like cheetahs. Son of a bitch. You tricked us, the lead kidnapper roared. Seeing that escape was impossible, his bloodshot eyes locked onto Julian, who was closest to him. His face twisted with raw fury. A glint of metal flashed in his hand. A dagger, wielded with suicidal desperation, plunged viciously toward Julian. Thwump, thwump, thwump. The dull, wet sound of the blade entering flesh was sickeningly clear. Julian felt a series of excruciating pains in his abdomen as the cold steel repeatedly stabbed into his body, warm blood gushing out. Before he lost consciousness, the last thing he saw was Eleanor's back as she held a terrified Sebastian, carefully checking him for injuries. She didn't even glance back at him. Waking again from searing pain, Julian found himself back in a hospital bed, tubes running in and out of his body. Eleanor was at his side. When she saw him open his eyes, her face immediately filled with guilt and concern. Julian, you're finally awake. I'm so sorry. My plan wasn't thorough enough. I never thought those animals would. Don't worry, the man who hurt you was killed on the spot. She began her masterful performance again. Julian closed his eyes, unwilling to waste even a single glance on her. Eleanor thought he was still angry and softened her voice. You get some rest. I'll go get the doctor to check on you. With that, she left the room. The room had barely fallen silent when the door was gently pushed open again. It was Sebastian. The fear was gone from his face, replaced by an arrogant resentment. Julian Vance. He walked to the bedside, his voice sharp. This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, I never would have been kidnapped and put through that nightmare. The more he spoke, the angrier he became. Seeing Julian lying weak, depending on a ventilator to breathe, a venomous glint appeared in his eyes. He suddenly reached out and lunged for Julian's oxygen mask. Julian's pupils contracted. He summoned every ounce of his remaining strength to fight back, one hand desperately protecting the mask while the other fumbled to press the emergency call button on the headboard. Beep, beep, beep. The piercing alarm screamed through the room. Sebastian hadn't expected him to react so quickly. He panicked, and before he could make another move, the door was thrown open by a nurse who had heard the alarm. What are you doing? The nurse shouted, shoving Sebastian away. She quickly checked Julian's condition, performing emergency procedures. After a chaotic few minutes, Julian's condition stabilized, but the shock and lack of oxygen had caused him to slip back into a semi-conscious state. When he was fully lucid again, Eleanor was back, her face grim. She stood by the bed, looking at the fragile man who seemed as if he might break at the slightest touch. Julian, she asked in a low voice, what just happened? Julian looked at her and, in a hoarse whisper, recounted everything. How Sebastian had come in, insulted him, and then tried to rip off his oxygen mask. As Eleanor listened, her face turned ashen. She spun around to face Sebastian, who was being detained by the nurse, and snapped, Sebastian Cole, you've gone too far. Her face was a mask of fury as she grabbed his wrist. You come with me. Before leaving the room, she turned back to Julian and offered an assurance, though her voice was devoid of warmth. You rest, Julian. I will get justice for you. Get justice for him? Would she? Julian pushed through the pain, slowly and arduously making his way to the door. Through the small glass window, he saw a scene around the corner of the hallway that made his heart turn to ash. Eleanor was not getting justice. Instead, she was pressed tightly against the wall by Sebastian, the two of them locked in a deep, passionate kiss, oblivious to the world. After a long moment, Sebastian pulled back, breathless, his thumbs stroking her swollen lips. Eleanor leaned against him, listening as he asked cautiously, Eleanor, you're not mad at me? I almost killed him. Eleanor looked up at him, her bright eyes filled with undisguised affection and tenderness. She sighed. I know you didn't mean it. You feel insecure. She stood on her toes, cupped his face, and her voice was so gentle it was like honey. With this kiss, I'm telling you, my heart has only ever had room for one person, and that's you. Being with Julian is just a way to protect you, to make him the target for all the danger. Do you understand? Not far away, Julian watched the two of them, heard those soul-destroying words, and felt no more sorrow. Instead, a low, broken laugh escaped his lips. Leaning against the wall, he dragged himself back to his bed, each step like walking on knives. A week later, Julian was discharged from hospital. He planned to go to a department store to buy a new rehearsal suit in preparation for his upcoming studies abroad. Eleanor had offered to go with him, but just after the discharge papers were signed, Officer Miller rushed over again, whispering in her ear. Eleanor's brow furrowed. She gave Julian an apologetic look. Julian, an urgent mission just came up. I have to go back and handle it immediately. I'll have Miller take you home first. I'll come get you as soon as I'm done. Julian said nothing, just nodded. He went to the department store alone and carefully selected a suit in a striking lake blue. Just as he was about to pay, a familiar, grating voice sounded behind him. I'll take that suit. Sebastian had appeared out of nowhere, his eyes fixed on the suit in Julian's hands with an air of arrogant entitlement. I saw it first, Julian said calmly, his grip tightening on the clothes. So what if you saw it first? Give it to me. Sebastian lunged for it. Julian sidestepped him, but Sebastian was relentless, lunging again. During the scuffle, Julian, wanting only to be rid of him, gave a forceful shrug. Ah! Sebastian cried out, stumbling backward. His back slammed hard into a rusty iron hook protruding from the wall, one meant for hanging promotional banners. Schlick! The hook tore mercilessly into his flesh. Sebastian's face contorted in agony. Blood rapidly soaked his pale white shirt as he crumpled to the floor. The store erupted in chaos. Julian froze, stunned. He never intended for this to happen. He rode in the ambulance to the hospital. Soon after, Eleanor arrived, rushing in with unconcealed panic on her face. She first ran to the operating room doors, then hurried over to Julian, taking his hand. Her palm was ice-cold and trembling slightly. Julian, don't be scared. It's okay. I'll take care of this for you. The old Julian would have been deeply moved by her. I'm on your side no matter what posture. But now, he could see with perfect clarity that while she was talking to him, comforting him, her anxious gaze kept darting toward the closed doors of the operating room. Her face was a mask of terror for Sebastian's well-being. Her words were for him, but her heart and soul were already in that room with the other man. Just then, the operating room door opened. The surgeon emerged, his expression grave. Colonel Thorne, Mr. Cole's injuries are severe. The hook damaged internal organs, causing a serious infection and internal bleeding. We need to administer a specialized imported antibiotic immediately, or he'll be in critical danger. But we don't have it here. Only the major hospitals in D.C. might have it. Eleanor's face fell. Without a moment's hesitation, she ordered her aide, Miller, contact the military hospital at Walter Reed immediately. Use my personal commendations to request a transfer of the drug. As fast as possible. Miller's eyes widened in shock. Colonel, your commendations. You earned those through countless life-or-death situations. Therefore, follow the order. Eleanor cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. Miller said no more and ran off to make the call. A nearby nurse looked at Eleanor and whispered to her colleague, Colonel Thorne is so good to Mr. Vance. To protect him from blame, she's willing to use her own precious commendations to get medicine for Mr. Cole. Julian stood nearby, listening to this absurd praise, a bitter coldness spreading through him. She wasn't doing it for him. She was doing it for her precious Sebastian, willing to use the honors she valued more than her own life. In her heart, 10 of him wouldn't be worth Sebastian's safety. After a tense wait, the doctor finally announced that Sebastian was out of danger thanks to the timely medication. Eleanor's tense expression finally eased. She let out a long sigh of relief, then turned to Julian. It's fine now. I'll have Miller take you home to rest. I'll handle the aftermath here. Don't worry, I won't let Sebastian blame you for this. Her arrangements sounded perfectly reasonable, designed to protect him. Julian said nothing, just quietly followed Miller. Miller drove him out of the hospital parking garage. Not far down the road, he suddenly clutched his stomach, his face contorted in pain. Mr. Vance, I'm sorry, my My stomach is suddenly killing me. I don't think I could drive you home. Maybe you could. Julian glanced at him, then said flatly, "It's fine. I could drive myself back." He moved to the driver's seat and started the car. As he was driving along a stretch of road bordering the river, he habitually tapped the brakes to slow down, only to find the pedals soft and unresponsive. The brakes had failed. His heart lurched. He stomped on the pedal repeatedly, but there was no resistance. The Jeep only picked up speed as it headed downhill. Ahead was a sharp turn, and below it, the churning river. Crash! The out-of-control Jeep smashed through the guardrail, sailed through the air in a hopeless arc, and plunged into the icy water below. The violent impact and the frigid river instantly consumed him. Clawing his way back from the brink of death once more, Julian found himself in a hospital again. His body ached as if it had been torn apart, and his lungs burned from the water he'd inhaled. He tried to move, but stopped when he heard hushed voices outside his room. It was Officer Miller and Eleanor. "Colonel, I still don't understand. Why did you have me tamper with the brakes? That was too dangerous. If Mr. Vance hadn't been so lucky, this time he could have." Then came Eleanor's voice, cool and devoid of any emotion, like an icicle in the dead of winter, piercing Julian's eardrums. "Why? Because he had the audacity to hurt the man I love. This was just a small lesson. If there's a next time," she paused, her tone chillingly casual, "I won't mind if he loses his life." Boom! Julian felt the world spin and collapse around him. So, the car crash that nearly killed him wasn't an accident at all. It was her. It was Eleanor. She had ordered Miller to sabotage his brakes. All because he had hurt her precious Sebastian. A small lesson, and if he didn't learn, next time it would cost him his life? Just then, the door opened. Eleanor walked in. Seeing Julian's open eyes, her face instantly switched back to that familiar mask of worry and concern. "Julian, you're awake. How are you feeling? It was my oversight. I promise, something like this will never happen again." Looking at her face, a perfect mask of feigned love and deep affection, Julian felt a chill spread from his heart to his very bones, threatening to freeze his blood. "Eleanor," he thought, "you are truly ruthless." He closed his eyes, burying the boundless hatred and despair deep within his heart. A single thought screamed through his mind, leave. He had to leave her for good, to sever all ties for this life and all eternity. For the next few days, Eleanor seemed to dedicate all her energy to nursing Julian back to health. She personally made him soup, watching until he finished every last drop. When he got out of bed to walk, she was always right there, supporting him. Before he went to sleep at night, she would sit by his bed under the dim lamplight and read him the news from the paper. Julian accepted it all in silence. He drank the soup she offered, used the hand she extended, and closed his eyes as she read. No one knew that he was counting down the days until he could finally leave. Soon, it was time for the Arts Command's special performance for the top brass of the military district. As a conductor, Julian had a critically important role. The day of the performance, the backstage area was a hive of activity. Julian, already in makeup and a tailored black tuxedo, looked like a nobleman from a bygone era. Just then, Eleanor appeared, dressed in her full uniform. In her hands, she held a large, stunning bouquet of red roses that immediately drew everyone's attention. Amidst the curious and envious glances, she walked straight to Julian, handing him the flowers. Her bright eyes sparkled with a gentle smile. "Julian, break a leg. Don't be nervous." She stood on her toes, seemingly about to give him her customary kiss on the cheek for good luck. But just as her lips were about to touch his skin, Julian sharply turned his head, avoiding the intimate gesture that once made his heart race. Eleanor's movement froze midair. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "What's wrong?" Julian lowered his eyes, hiding the churning disgust and coldness within. He kept his voice as steady as possible. "Nothing. I'm just not used to this in front of so many people." Eleanor studied him for a moment. Seeing nothing unusual in his expression, she relaxed, a fond smile returning to her lips. "All right, whatever you say." Though she didn't get her kiss, her tender gesture with the flowers still drew whispers of admiration. "Colonel Thorne is so wonderful to him. They're such a perfect couple. I'm so jealous." The murmurs and envious looks felt like needles pricking the heart of one person standing in the corner. Julian glanced up and met the furious, jealous glare of Sebastian Cole. Sebastian shot him a look filled with hatred, then stomped his foot and stormed out of the backstage area. Julian sneered inwardly, dismissing the minor incident. The performance was about to begin. Julian took his conductor's baton, drew a deep breath, and walked onto the brightly lit stage. The music began, and he moved with the melody, every note, every beat rendered to perfection. It was as if he was channeling all the pain and suffering of this life and the last into the music. However, not long into the performance, he felt a sharp, stabbing pain in the sole of his foot, as if tiny, hard objects were digging into it. He frowned slightly, assuming his new shoes were just stiff, and tried to ignore it, maintaining his smile and fluid movements. The music reached its finale. He was meant to exit with the final crescendo. He pointed his toe, preparing to land. Ack! The moment his left foot touched the ground, an excruciating, bone-deep pain shot up from his soul. It felt as if countless red-hot nails had been driven through his flesh and into his bones. The agony made it impossible to keep his balance. His body lurched, and he fell from the high edge of the stage. Julian, Mr. Vance! The audience gasped. The hall erupted into chaos. Eleanor was the first one to rush the stage. She scooped up Julian, who was curled into a ball, his face pale with pain. Seeing the blood seeping through his left shoe, the color drained from her own face. The arms holding him trembled. "Doctor! Someone call a doctor!" she screamed, running like a madwoman toward the backstage area. Outside the hospital operating room, the atmosphere was tense. The light went off, and the surgeon emerged, pulling down his mask. His expression was grave as he addressed Eleanor and the leadership from the Arts Command. Thankfully, he was brought in just in time. His foot was pierced by multiple thumbtacks. The wounds are deep. Some are dangerously close to tendons and nerves. We've cleaned and stitched them, but recovery will take a long time. If it had been any later, or if the injuries were any worse, he might never have been able to stand again. Never stand again. The colleagues who had followed them to the hospital gasped. Director Roberts' face was grim. She looked at Eleanor, then at Julian, who was being wheeled out, still groggy from the anesthesia. "Colonel Thorne, Julian, we found out what happened. It was Sebastian Cole. He was jealous that Julian was the lead conductor while he was just a backup vocalist. He was resentful and secretly put the thumbtacks in Julian's shoe. We have him in custody, locked in the command's holding room. It's up to you now. If you choose to forgive him, we'll give him a severe reprimand and transfer him out of the unit. If you don't, we'll hand him over to the police." Lying on the gurney, his consciousness still fuzzy, Julian heard the words Sebastian Cole and thumbtacks. They pierced his mind like icicles. Without hesitation, he said in a weak but clear voice, "Press charges. Prosecute him." Director Roberts nodded. "All right, we respect your decision." Just then, Julian noticed a subtle, almost imperceptible stiffening in Eleanor's body. She bit her lip, the line of her jaw tight, and stared out the window with a complex expression. In the end, she said nothing. She silently followed the nurses, pushing him back to his room. Then, as always, she began to care for him meticulously, giving him water, wiping his sweat, as if her momentary strangeness had been nothing but his imagination. But a dark, foreboding feeling grew stronger in Julian's heart. He knew Eleanor. Her protectiveness of Sebastian was beyond reason. As expected, that afternoon, Julian woke from a nap to find Eleanor gone. His heart skipped a beat, a sense of unease washing over him. He struggled out of bed and stopped a passing nurse. "Excuse me, have you seen Colonel Thorne?" The nurse thought for a moment. "The colonel left in a hurry just a little while ago." Left? Julian's heart sank. He ignored the searing pain in his foot, leaning on the wall as he made his way to the hospital entrance. In the distance, he saw Eleanor's familiar Jeep speeding away. The direction, it looked like she was heading toward the police department. He immediately hailed a cab, hissing through the pain, "Sir, follow that military vehicle to the police station." When he finally arrived, breathless and in agony, he saw Eleanor walking out of the building, holding Sebastian's hand. "Eleanor, thank you. I really didn't think you'd use your connections for me." Eleanor held his hand, standing on her toes, to gently tidy his hair. Her gesture was tender, her voice a soft caress. "Don't be silly. How could I just stand by and watch you suffer in there? Don't worry, I've already taken care of it. The matter is closed, and it won't go on your record." "I'm sorry," Sebastian said, biting his lip. "I was a fool. I saw you being so good to him backstage, giving him flowers, trying to kiss him. I love you so much, that's why I put the tacks in his shoe. Eleanor, I was wrong. Can you forgive me?" Hearing his confession, Eleanor showed no anger. Instead, she soothed him. I know everything. There were too many people backstage. I was just putting on a show for him and for them." Her voice dropped, laced with a barely concealed disgust. "As for kissing him, Sebastian, you know perfectly well that the very thought of touching him makes me sick. The thought of touching him makes me sick." Hiding around the corner, Julian heard every word. It was as if he'd been struck by lightning. The blood in his veins turned to ice. A colossal wave of grief and humiliation crashed over him, his heart feeling as if it were being ripped apart by an invisible hand, the pain so intense he could hardly breathe. He watched Eleanor carefully help Sebastian into the car as they drove away, looking for all the world like a legitimate couple, while he was nothing but a superfluous, disgusting shadow. Julian stumbled backward, leaning against the cold, rough wall to keep from collapsing. He gritted his teeth, his body trembling. This woman was not worth his sorrow. He was lost, a walking ghost. Step by agonizing step, he dragged his injured foot back toward the hospital. But as he turned into a quiet alley not far from the entrance, a sudden, blunt pain exploded at the back of his head. His vision went black. Before he could make a sound, a burlap sack was thrown over his head, plunging him into darkness and robbing him of any ability to fight back. Through a dizzying haze, he felt himself being dragged violently and then dumped onto a hard, cold surface. He could faintly hear a voice, one he knew to his very core, now as cold as a death sentence. It was Eleanor. Break every bone in his body. Then, hang him from the rooftop of the Arts Command building. Leave him there all night. Let him reflect on what he's done. The aide's voice was hesitant, laced with fear. Call Colonel. But, why? Mr. Vancy? Why? Eleanor's voice was a cold sneer. Who gave him the right to send Sebastian to the police? To let Sebastian suffer that kind of terror and humiliation? This is just a lesson he'll never forget. Do as I say. Lying in the sack, Julian heard the judgment from hell. His heart felt as if it had been instantly frozen, then shattered by a sledgehammer. Despair, a boundless darkness, completely consumed him. To avenge Sebastian, she would subject him, her husband in name, to this torture, this ultimate humiliation. He wanted to scream, to question her, but the sack muffled his voice. Pain and terror choked him. He couldn't make a sound. All he could do was lie in the suffocating darkness and feel the sickening crack of his bones breaking and the gut-wrenching, soul-tearing agony. His consciousness dissolved into the abyss of pain and humiliation. The next morning, the first person to arrive at the Arts Command building screamed. Hanging from the railing of the rooftop entrance was a blood-soaked, barely breathing figure. A crowd quickly gathered below. My God, who is that? I think. Is that Mr. Vance? How did he get up there? He's covered in blood. What happened? Quick, get him down. Somebody help him. Some pointed in horror, others gawked with curiosity. A few snapped to their senses and rushed upstairs, scrambling to cut down the broken form of Julian Vance. Through the searing pain and the biting wind, Julian regained a sliver of consciousness. He saw the faces around him, pitying, curious, contemptuous. He felt the all-consuming pain and the profound weakness in his body. A wave of shame and humiliation, so powerful it threatened to annihilate him, washed over him. He wished he could just die, rather than endure this torment, this degradation that felt like being flayed alive. For the next few days, Eleanor never appeared. Only her aide, Officer Miller, came once to deliver a message. Mr. Vance, the colonel has been called away on an urgent mission. She will be gone for some time and won't be able to care for you. She asks that you take care of yourself. Urgent mission? Julian lay in his hospital bed, his heart a dead, silent thing. She wasn't on a mission. She was comforting her precious Sebastian, who had suffered such a terrible injustice. He closed his eyes and said nothing. A few days later, the call finally came from the county clerk's office. Mr. Julian Vance, your divorce petition has been approved. You may come to collect the decree at any time. After hanging up, Julian sat in stunned silence for a long time. Then, 2 streams of hot tears finally escaped, rolling down his cheeks. He was free. He was finally, truly free from the nightmare that had spanned 2 lifetimes, a nightmare of deceit and exploitation. He told no one, supporting himself on his still casted leg. He checked himself out of the hospital. Alone, he made the difficult journey to the clerk's office and received the thin piece of paper that felt as heavy as a gravestone. Holding the decree, he didn't go home. He went straight to the city's largest newspaper. He paid to have a short but explosive notice published. I, Julian Vance, have officially dissolved my marriage with Colonel Eleanor Thorne. Henceforth, we are free to pursue our own lives, with no further connection. By this notice, I make it known that Colonel Thorne's heart belongs to another, Mr. Sebastian Cole of the Army Arts Command. Their devotion is a testament for all to see. All past grievances are now dust. Let this be known to all. The purpose was simple. Julian Vance would no longer be anyone's shield. Those who held a grudge against Eleanor Thorne could now see clearly. The person she truly cared for, the one she wanted to protect, was Sebastian Cole. Having done this, Julian felt the last great weight lift from his chest. He returned to the apartment, quickly packed the suitcase he had already prepared, and left without a backward glance. The world was vast, and he was finally free to roam it. The plane flew steadily at 30,000 feet. Outside the window, an endless sea of clouds rolled by, gilded by the sun. Julian sat by the window, a thin blanket over his legs. He watched the magnificent view, his heart filled with an unprecedented sense of peace and emptiness. 50 years of lies, countless sacrifices, the cold embrace of a bloody death. The nightmares that had tormented him day and night now seemed to be left behind on the rapidly shrinking land below. He opened the journal he carried with him and picked up a pen. The nib glided across the page, leaving clear, firm words. October 16th, 1974. Sunny. Flying to Moscow. From this day forward, Julian Vance lives only for music. The past is smoke, all has scattered. He closed the journal and his eyes, listening to the roar of the engines. It was no longer noise, but the overture to a new life. Meanwhile, back at Fort Belvoir, Eleanor finished her multi-day urgent mission, which had actually been spent calming down Sebastian, who was emotionally unstable after his brief detention. A trace of fatigue clung to her as she parked the car in front of their apartment building. The night air was cool as she stepped out. She looked up habitually at their window. It was dark. In the past, no matter how late she returned, if Julian was home, a warm light would be on for her, a beacon in the night. Behind that light, there would usually be a tall figure, either preparing a late-night snack for her or waiting up with a book. Now, the window was just another dark rectangle in the monolithic blackness of the building, utterly lifeless. A fleeting, minuscule pang of loss, so faint she barely registered it, pricked Eleanor's heart. It was like a pebble dropped into a lake, creating a tiny ripple before vanishing. She frowned, annoyed at her own inexplicable emotion. He's still at the hospital, obviously. His foot wouldn't have healed this fast. I must be exhausted. She shook off the strange feeling and went upstairs, unlocking the door. The air inside was cold, filled with the stale smell of an unoccupied space. She flipped on the lights. The living room looked the same, yet something felt different. It was too neat, too empty. She didn't dwell on it, attributing it to Julian's hospital stay. After a hot shower, she collapsed in a bed and fell into a deep sleep. In her dreams, she thought she saw a man's despairing eyes, but when she woke, it was just a hazy shadow. The next morning, Eleanor's internal clock woke her at the usual time. She changed into her crisp uniform, adjusting her collar in the mirror, planning to go visit Julian at the hospital later. She had to maintain the image of a good wife. After all, her shield was for the moment still necessary. His injury and the stunt with the police had angered her, but a little coaxing, and he'd come around. He was always so easy to manage. Just as she was about to leave, the door to her office burst open. Officer Miller stood there, pale and sweating, clutching a freshly printed newspaper as if it were a hot iron. He rushed in, his voice trembling. "Call Colonel. It's bad. Something terrible has happened. You have to see this." Eleanor's brow furrowed, displeased by his lack of composure. "What is it? Is the sky falling?" She took the paper from him, her eyes scanning the front page casually. But when her gaze fell on a bold-bordered announcement at the bottom of the page, she froze. Her pupils contracted. The headline screamed at her, a formal declaration by Mr. Julian Vance. The words that followed were like bolts of lightning, striking her one after another. "I, Julian Vance, have officially dissolved my marriage with Colonel Eleanor Thorne. Henceforth, we are free to pursue our own lives, with no further connection. By this notice, I make it known. Colonel Thorne's heart belongs to another, Mr. Sebastian Cole of the Army Arts Command. Their devotion is a testament for all to see. All past grievances are now dust. Let this be known to all." A roar filled Eleanor's ears. Blood rushed to her head, and her vision momentarily went black. How dare he? He published a divorce announcement in the newspaper, and he exposed her and Sebastian to the entire world? What did he find out? How did he know so much? The thought brought with it the panic of a carefully laid scheme being utterly exposed, followed by the volcanic rage of betrayal. He was trying to get Sebastian killed. All her enemies, everyone watching her, now knew that Sebastian was her weakness. Even if Julian hated her, he shouldn't have used such a vicious method of revenge. This was pushing Sebastian into the fire. Damn him. Eleanor slammed the newspaper down on her desk. The solid wood groaned under the impact. A vein throbbed at her temple, her eyes dangerously dark. Get the car. We're going to the Arts Command. I'm going to find him. I want to ask him myself what the hell he thinks he's doing. Eleanor's Jeep tore through the base like a runaway train. She stormed into the Arts Command and burst into the director's office without knocking. Director Roberts was reviewing a file. She looked up at Eleanor, her expression not a surprise, but of a cool, distant calm. Colonel Thorne, can I help you? Her tone was polite but icy. Where is Julian Vance? Tell him to come see me. Eleanor bit out, her voice a low growl. Director Roberts set down the file and looked at the woman before her, still formidable, but unable to hide the fury twisting her features. Colonel, Julian is no longer here. Yesterday afternoon, he boarded an international flight to study at the Moscow Conservatory. It was approved by the command, all proper and by the book. Moscow. Eleanor stared as if she'd heard a ghost story, her eyes wide with disbelief. He went to Moscow? When did this happen? Why didn't I know? It was Mr. Vance's own choice. Director Roberts's voice held a trace of regret, but also firm resolve. Before he left, he specifically requested that you, Colonel Thorne, refrain from disturbing his new life. His own choice? Not disturb him. The words stung Eleanor. Her voice rose sharply. I'm his wife. Colonel Thorne, Director Roberts interrupted, her gaze sharp. If I recall correctly, today's newspaper made it quite clear. You are no longer husband and wife. Furthermore, Julian followed standard procedure. He filed a unilateral petition, which the command reviewed and approved. Eleanor's heart felt like it had been struck by a hammer. She spun on her heel and raced to the county clerk's office. She received the same cold, irrefutable answer. Mr. Julian Vance's divorce petition was valid and had been finalized. She stood on a busy street, dazed, watching the people hurry by. For the first time in her life, she felt a profound sense of confusion and a complete loss of control. The man she had always held so firmly in her grasp, the man she considered her possession, had just cleanly and decisively broken free in a way she had never anticipated. He had vanished without a trace. A strange emptiness washed over her, a feeling that, for a moment, even overshadowed her rage. Late that night, Eleanor returned to the cold, empty house. Perhaps it was the stress of the past few days or her erratic eating, but her chronic stomach condition suddenly flared up. Sharp, twisting pains shot through her, and a cold sweat broke out on her skin. She curled up on the sofa, her face pale with agony, and subconsciously croaked out, Julian. The medicine. The sound echoed in the empty living room. There was no reply, only a dead, oppressive silence. Eleanor froze. She struggled to her feet, tried to get to the drawer for her pills, but a wave of pain and weakness made her knock over a glass on the coffee table. The sound of shattering glass was jarringly loud in the quiet night. Water pooled on the floor, and she collapsed back onto the sofa in a heap. In that moment, she realized with stark, painful clarity, the man who would always appear with a glass of warm water and her pills, no matter how late it was, the man who would gently rub her stomach and soothe her with a low voice, telling her just hold on, it'll be better after medicine, was gone. He was really, truly gone. There would never again be anyone to hand her that perfectly warm glass of water right when she needed it. A wave of irrational frustration and a sliver of panic, a feeling she refused to acknowledge, gripped her. She fought through the pain, stumbling as she rummaged through drawers and cabinets. She finally found the pills in a forgotten corner, swallowed a few dry, and then chased them down with a glass of cold tap water. The pain in her stomach subsided slightly, but the void in her heart only grew larger. A few days later, Eleanor began to organize the study, hoping to chase away the unsettling feeling with busy work. On the top shelf of a bookcase filled with old belongings, she found a dusty tin box. On a whim, she opened it. Inside was a neat stack of newspaper clippings. They were all articles about her from over the years, commendations, training exercises, even minor mentions in obscure columns. Anything with her name on it had been carefully cut out, pasted, and dated. Beneath the clippings was a simple, craft paper-covered notebook. She opened it. Inside was Julian's neat, elegant handwriting. It wasn't a diary, but a record of everything about her. Eleanor's stomach is sensitive to cold. Flare-ups are common at night. Keep antacids in the top left drawer of the nightstand. Must be taken with warm water, never cold. Old gunshot wound in her left shoulder aches in damp weather. Prepare heat patches in advance. Prefers light, simple meals. Especially likes pork and winter melon soup. but will never ask for it. Must remember, a light sleeper. Wakes easily with light. Check that the curtains are fully drawn before bed. Page after page, entry after entry, recorded in meticulous detail all her habits, her health issues, even her secret preferences she never spoke of. Eleanor's fingers froze. She never knew. She never knew that Julian had been doing all of this for her, this quiet, exhaustive research into her life. Tucked into the last page of the notebook was a slightly yellowed photograph. It was a copy of an old ID photo of her in uniform. Beside the photo was a single line of small text, apparently written by Julian in secret. My hero. Those two words were like 4 red-hot needles, plunging deep into Eleanor's heart. Her hand trembled uncontrollably as she traced the faded letters. Her heart felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible fist, a sharp, unfamiliar pain shooting through her. She slammed the notebook shut as if it had burned her, muttering, "Pointless." But the notebook and the photograph had taken root in her mind, impossible to ignore. The news of Julian's departure soon reached Sebastian. Overjoyed, he immediately rushed to Eleanor's house. "Eleanor." His face was alight with excitement. "That nuisance is finally gone. From now on, can I move in? The place is empty anyway, and my cover is blown. I'm worried I might be in danger." Eleanor looked at the man she had loved for so long. Thinking that he was indeed in more danger because of Julian's announcement, she nodded. "Fine, you can move in. It's safer here." Sebastian was ecstatic and immediately began acting as if he were the man of the house. That night, he eagerly tried to cook a celebratory dinner for Eleanor. However, the kitchen soon filled with the sounds of chaos. He used too much salt, burned the vegetables, and filled the house with smoke. The final dishes were a disaster. Eleanor sat at the table, looking at the unappetizing food, and then at Sebastian, who had a smudge of soot on his face and was complaining about how gentlemen don't belong in the kitchen. Involuntarily, her mind flashed to Julian in that same kitchen. He could always whip up a variety of simple, delicious meals that she loved, and he always left the kitchen spotless. She picked up her fork, forced down a few bites that tasted like ash, and then put it down. Sebastian looked puzzled. "Eleanor, is it not good? I'll practice. I'll get better." Eleanor stared out the window at the dark night. For the first time, the words "I'll get better" sounded grating to her ears. She just gave a non-committal, her appetite gone. The next morning, as Eleanor was getting ready to leave, she noticed a loose button on her uniform. She instinctively handed it to Sebastian. "Sebastian, can you fix this for me?" Sebastian fumbled with the needle and thread, his stitches crooked and clumsy. He even pricked his finger. Eleanor looked at his shoddy work and again thought of Julian. He was a man, but he always felt it was his duty to take care of his wife. He would always offer to mend her clothes. His stitches were neat and almost invisible, and he would always look up with a gentle smile and say, "I promise it'll be stronger than new." A surge of frustration welled up inside her. She took the jacket back, her voice sharp. "Forget it. I'll do it myself." Sebastian stood there, stunned and hurt. Things soon became even more trying. As a result of Julian's announcement, Sebastian began to experience frequent accidents. One day, he was cornered by a group of strangers on his way home. Although the plainclothes guards Eleanor had assigned to him intervened in time, Sebastian ran to her for comfort, terrified. As Eleanor soothed him and dealt with the fallout, she felt an unprecedented level of exhaustion and frustration. For the first time, a thought flickered through her mind. If Julian were here, he would have been calmer. He might have even found a way to handle this himself. The thought startled her, and it was followed by an even deeper irritation. Why was she thinking of him? But the real blow was yet to come. One day, Eleanor was summoned to her commanding officer's office. General Thompson's face was like thunder. He slammed a file down on his desk with a loud crack. "Eleanor, look at what you've done." Eleanor picked up the file. It was an internal investigation report. It detailed how she had used her military commendations to acquire medicine for Sebastian, how she had abused her authority to get him released from police custody, and the severe damage her scandalous conduct was causing to the military's reputation. The general, his face etched with disappointment, pointed at her. "You have let me down, Eleanor. For Sebastian Cole, you've thrown away your honor and your discipline as a soldier, using your commendations, abusing your power. Now, it's a public scandal, and your husband has left you in the most humiliating way possible. Do you have any idea what the stars on your shoulders represent?" Eleanor's face was ashen. Her hands, clenched at her sides, were white-knuckled, but she couldn't offer a single word in her defense. General Thompson looked at her and sighed heavily, his voice a mixture of deep disappointment and anger. I've watched Julian Vance grow up. A fine man. One of the best talents the Arts Command has ever seen. For you, he gave up the chance to study abroad without a second thought. All these years of marriage, how many times has he been put in danger because of you? How many times has he been injured, bled for you? How much has he sacrificed? And this is how you treat your husband. Write a full report. You're suspended for 1 week, effective immediately. I want you to think long and hard about where you went wrong. The general's final order was absolute. Eleanor walked out of his office, clutching the damning report, her steps unsteady. The sun was bright, but she felt a chilling cold seep into her bones. Suspended. She, Eleanor Thorne, had never received so much as a reprimand in her entire military career. And it had all started the moment Julian left. The man she had never truly valued, the man she saw as nothing more than a shield. His departure had, like the first falling domino, triggered a catastrophic chain reaction in her life and career. For the first time, she was forced to truly examine the role that the man who had vanished had played in her life. And the answers seemed to be hurtling toward a conclusion she could not accept. The week of her suspension felt like a century. She locked herself in her cold, empty house, refusing all visitors. During the day, she sat in the study, staring at the harshly worded suspension order and the blank pages of the self-criticism report she was required to write. She couldn't form a single word. The pen hovered over the paper, ink bleeding into a dark blot, a perfect mirror of her chaotic mind. But the nights were the true torment. She developed severe insomnia. The moment she closed her eyes, images would flash uncontrollably through her mind. Julian, covered in blood, hanging from the rooftop railing, his eyes filled with despair. Julian, lying in a hospital bed, weak but resolute, insisting that Sebastian be prosecuted. Julian, walking away from the courthouse with a divorce decree, his back straight and unyielding. And finally, the newspaper announcement that had nailed her to a pillar of shame. These images swirled together, finally settling on the man in the black tuxedo before the performance, looking like a prince. Back then, there had still been a light in his eyes when he looked at her. When did that light go out? Was it all the times she chose to protect Sebastian? Was it when she allowed, even encouraged, Sebastian to hurt him? Or was it when she spat out the words, "The thought of touching him makes me sick"? A sharp pain lanced through her chest. Eleanor jerked awake from a half-sleep, her forehead slick with cold sweat. In the darkness, she gasped for breath and instinctively reached for the space beside her in the bed. It was cold and empty. In the past, no matter how late she came home, there would always be a warm body there. When she had a nightmare, he would drowsily pull her into his arms, his deep, sleepy voice murmuring, "It's okay, Eleanor. I'm here." But now there was nothing. Only the cold moonlight streaming through the window and a deathly silence. She turned on the lamp. The dim, yellow light chased away some of the darkness, but not the vast emptiness in her heart. She lit a cigarette. Through the haze of smoke, another dream came to her. It was years ago, not long after they were married. There was an internal showcase at the Arts Command. He was new, but he had fought for her and won a solo performance. The spotlight was on him as he stood on stage, his voice clear and bright, singing about his hopes for the future. His eyes were so clear then, as if they held all the stars in the sky. After the performance, he had taken her hand, his voice filled with a profound sincerity. "Eleanor," he had said, "I prepared that for you." How had she responded? She thought she had just smiled politely and said, "You sang very well." Perhaps there had been a flicker of pride, the vanity of having such a talented husband, but she had never truly taken his vow to heart. Now, in the dream, the scene was magnified, the light in his eyes so brilliant it almost burned her soul. "Eleanor, I prepared that for you." The vow from the dream echoed in her mind like a curse. She woke up again with a start, her heart pounding, a sense of panic and emptiness overwhelming her. She turned her head and saw Sebastian sleeping peacefully beside her, a contented smile on his face. But looking at him, Eleanor felt no tenderness, only a strange irritation and a sense of distance. She got out of bed, went to the living room, and lit another cigarette. The smoke stung her eyes, and it stung the heart that was just beginning to ache. Sebastian quickly sensed the change in Eleanor. She grew quiet and distant, often staring into space. The patience and warmth she once showed him were gone, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible resistance when he tried to get close. He felt a growing anxiety. He decided to use her suspension, this period of vulnerability, to solidify his position. One night, Sebastian showered, doused himself in strong cologne, and entered Eleanor's bedroom. "Eleanor," He wrapped his arms around her from behind as she stood staring out the window. Tonight, let me stay with you. Eleanor was being tormented by a storm of conflicting emotions and regret. Her mood was foul. She felt the heat of his body, smelled the overpowering scent of his cologne, and stiffened. Under the influence of alcohol, her rational defenses were weak. She didn't push him away. Perhaps she, too, needed a distraction, some way to numb the pain. Half resisting, she let it happen. But in the middle of it, as she looked at Sebastian's panting face, another face flashed uncontrollably in her mind. Julian's. That face that was always slightly distant, but so focused and unwavering when he looked at her. She remembered the coldness in his eyes when he left, the finality of his departure. A powerful wave of disgust and guilt washed over her. All desire vanished, replaced by a feeling of nausea. She shoved them off, pulled the covers over herself, and turned her back to him. "Go to sleep," she said, her voice hoarse and weary. Sebastian froze, his expression hardening. He moved closer. "Eleanor, what's wrong? We could be together openly now. Aren't you happy?" "Happy?" Eleanor scoffed, a bitter, self-mocking edge to her voice. "What is there to be happy about?" She got up, threw on a robe, and stalked out to the living room, leaving Sebastian alone in the bed, his face a mixture of shock and fury. Eleanor sat on the sofa in the dark, drinking one bottle after another. The only light was the cherry of her cigarette, illuminating her grim, pained face. She started to remember, forcing herself, punishing herself, to recall every time Julian had been hurt and had still managed to smile for her. How he had silently endured every injustice. How, when she wasn't looking, he had taken care of everything for her. She remembered the time she was seriously injured on a mission. She had been unconscious for 3 days. When she woke up, the first thing she saw was his bloodshot eyes and the tears that instantly welled up. He had just smiled and said, "You're awake. That's all that matters." She found out later he hadn't slept for those 3 days, just watched over her. She remembered the time she was hospitalized for a bleeding ulcer. He had cooked different kinds of nourishing soup for her every day, feeding her spoon by spoon. He was so exhausted he was pale, but he still comforted her, saying, "You'll be out of here soon." She remembered. So much. All the things she had taken for granted, all the sacrifices she had dismissed, now played back in her mind like a film, frame by frame, vivid and blindingly clear. "What have I done?" Eleanor screamed, smashing the bottle in her hand against the wall. She trembled, a cornered animal, and lunged to her feet, sweeping everything off the coffee table, bottles, glasses, vases, sending them crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering glass tore through the silent night. A tidal wave of regret and pain threatened to rip her apart. She collapsed amidst the wreckage, drunk and broken, calling his name over and over, her voice a raw, desperate sob. "Julian, Julian, I was wrong. I know I was wrong." But in the empty house, the only answer was the echo of her own voice. A few days later, General Thompson, concerned, came to visit. He opened the door to find a scene of devastation and Eleanor, curled up on the sofa, looking as if she had aged 10 years. The general sighed heavily and sat down beside her. His voice was heavy with sorrow. "So now you feel regret? It's too late, I'm afraid. I know that boy, Julian. He seems gentle on the surface, but his spirit is stronger than anyone's. When his heart dies, it's dead for good. You can't bring it back." He looked out the window, his gaze distant. "Publishing that divorce announcement, it wasn't just to cut ties with you. It was a decisive way to remove himself from the line of fire. To stop being Eleanor Thorne's husband. He was saving his own life, Eleanor." The general turned back to her, his eyes sharp. His words were like hammer blows to her heart. "You didn't just lose a husband. You lost the one man who once loved you with his life. The one man who once loved you with his life." The words were a poisoned blade, tearing through Eleanor's final layer of self-deception and exposing her bleeding, ravaged heart. It was only in this moment, in the face of absolute loss and crushing self-reflection, that Eleanor was forced to confront the terrifying truth she had been running from for so long. She had fallen in love with Julian Vance. Not because he reminded her of someone else, not because he was a convenient shield, but because she loved him. She loved the resilient, sincere man who had silently given everything for her. But in her foolishness, blinded by a nostalgic obsession and a pathetic need for control, she had treated a priceless treasure like garbage. She had pushed him away, wounded him until he was broken beyond repair. This realization brought no relief, only a more profound, soul-crushing despair. Because she knew the general was right. Julian's heart was dead. He was never coming back. Just then, Sebastian, impeccably dressed, walked in carrying a tray with tea. He smiled politely. "General, please have some tea. Eleanor, you should drink some water, too. Don't be so upset." Eleanor looked up, her gaze landing on him. Her eyes were ice. The warmth and affection she once held for him were gone, replaced by a chilling clarity and utter disgust. "Sebastian," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, "we're over." The smile on Sebastian's face froze. The teacup in his hand trembled. "Eleanor, what? What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we are finished." Eleanor stood up, her expression cold and remote. "From this moment on, you and I have nothing to do with each other. For the sake of what we once had, I won't press charges for what you've done. Consider yourself lucky." "No, I don't accept this." Sebastian shrieked, lunging to grab her. "Eleanor, you can't do this to me. I've loved you for years. I was almost kidnapped. I was arrested. And now you're just dumping me. You can't." Eleanor shoved him away without a trace of pity, her eyes blank. She called out to the guard at the door. "Officer." Miller entered immediately. "Escort Mr. Cole out. From now on, he is not to set foot in this house again without my permission." Her command was cold and final. "Yes, ma'am." Miller, though shocked, followed his orders, firmly escorting the cursing and screaming Sebastian out the door. Eleanor watched him go without a flicker of emotion. She turned and looked out the window, toward the distant north. A single, obsessive thought burned in her mind like a wildfire. "I have to find him. Whatever it takes, I have to get him back." After dealing with the fallout from her suspension, Eleanor, ignoring her own fragile health and the potential disciplinary action, used every connection and every bit of savings she had to expedite the complicated process of getting a visa. She boarded a flight to Moscow. The long flight was an ordeal for her, but she gritted her teeth, sustained by a single hope: to see him, to beg for his forgiveness. After arriving in Moscow, she used her embassy contacts to finally track down the address of Julian's music conservatory. The late autumn wind in Moscow was biting cold. Eleanor stood outside the conservatory's magnificent historic gates, wearing only a thin black coat, her breath turning to white mist in the air. She didn't feel the cold. Her eyes were fixed on the ornate iron gates, her heart hammering with a mixture of hope, anxiety, and a terrible, suffocating dread. She waited for hours. As dusk fell, students began to trickle out. And then, in the crowd, she saw him, the man who haunted her dreams. Julian was walking out with a few fair-haired classmates, dressed in a sleek rehearsal outfit with a long black down coat thrown over it. He was lean and walked with a light, confident stride. He was laughing, chatting with his friends in fluent Russian, his eyes bright and full of a light she had never seen before, a light of independence and brilliance. For a moment, Eleanor was stunned. She had never seen this Julian. So alive, so captivating. He was like a man who had shed a heavy skin and was finally, truly himself. She was hit with a wave of awe, followed by an even deeper, more desperate regret. She could no longer contain herself. She stumbled forward, blocking his path, her voice trembling with a raw, desperate need. "Julian." The smile on Julian's face vanished the instant he saw her. The eyes that had been filled with laughter seconds before turned to ice, as cold and hard as the Siberian winter. There was no warmth, only a profound, chilling distance. "Colonel Thorne," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, a polite address to a stranger. "Can I help you?" The formal title was a shard of ice in Eleanor's heart. The pain was so sharp she could barely breathe. I came to find you." She struggled to form the words, her voice dry. "I know I was wrong. Everything I did was wrong. I was inhuman. You can hit me, scream at me, anything. Just come back with me. Please? We can start over." "Start over?" A cold, mocking smile touched Julian's lips, as if she had just told the most absurd joke in the world. "Go back where?" "Back to your side, to be a shield for your beloved Sebastian Cole." His gaze was like a knife, piercing her. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I have no desire to live that life again. And I certainly have no interest in playing a part in your drama of deep affection anymore." Without another glance, as if she were nothing more than a bad smell in the air, he turned back to his confused classmates, picked up their conversation, and walked away. Eleanor stood frozen, watching his back disappear down the street. The cold Moscow wind cut at her face, but it was nothing compared to the glacial cold of his words, his eyes. She didn't give up. She found out where he lived and waited below his apartment building. She didn't dare go up, so she just paced in the cold, a ghost haunting the sidewalk. One evening, she saw him returning from the conservatory. At the same time, a vibrant, beautiful Russian girl with fiery energy ran up to greet him. They met at the entrance, talking and laughing like old friends. The girl, Irina, saw the strange woman staring at Julian and frowned, stepping protectively closer to him. She barked something at Eleanor in loud Russian. "Who are you? Why are you always lurking around here? Get away from him." Eleanor didn't understand the words, but she understood the hostility in the girl's eyes and the easy intimacy between her and Julian. A fire of jealousy and rage ignited within her. Her eyes red, she took a step forward, ready to lunge. "Eleanor!" Julian's voice was a sharp command. He stepped in front of Irina, his eyes blazing with a warning. "This isn't your military base. Control yourself. Irina is my friend, and I will not have you harassing her." He then turned, gently took Irina's hand, and spoke to her in soft Russian. "Let's go. Ignore her." Irina shot Eleanor one last glare before letting Julian lead her into the building. Eleanor stood rooted to the spot, watching him walk away, holding another woman's hand. Her fists were clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms, drawing blood she didn't feel. A wave of helplessness and despair, colder than the Russian winter, washed over her. On this foreign street, she finally truly understood. She had lost him. For good. The Moscow winter was brutal, but inside the conservatory's rehearsal hall, it was warm. Julian was practicing for an important showcase. The piece was incredibly difficult, requiring perfect timing. But in an instant, tragedy struck. With a sickening crack, the conductor's podium he was standing on suddenly splintered and collapsed. Amidst the screams of the other musicians, Julian fell like a broken bird from the 5-meter-high stage. Thud! He hit the hard floor with a dull, heavy sound. The sickening crunch of bone breaking was audible. Blood immediately began to pool beneath him. "Julian, call an ambulance." The hall descended into chaos. Julian was rushed to the best hospital in Moscow. The initial diagnosis was dire. Multiple compound fractures, ruptured internal organs, massive hemorrhaging. He was dying. To make matters worse, he had a rare blood type, Rh negative, and the local blood bank had a critical shortage. The news spread like wildfire. When Eleanor got the call, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She ran from her room like a madwoman, not even stopping to grab a coat, and hailed a cab, speeding toward the hospital. She burst into the emergency area just as doctors were frantically discussing the blood shortage in a mix of Russian and English. A translator was stammering, trying to explain the gravity of the situation. "Take mine." Eleanor shoved through the crowd, her eyes bloodshot, her voice a raw scream. "I'm Rh negative. Take my blood and save him." The doctors stared at the pale, wild-eyed woman who had just appeared. The lead surgeon frowned, speaking in clipped English. "Ma'am, calm down. You're in no condition to donate. A massive transfusion would be extremely dangerous for you. It could." "I said take it." Eleanor suddenly pulled a pistol from her coat. She didn't point it at the doctor. She pressed the cold muzzle to her own temple, her eyes alight with a terrifying, desperate madness. "Save him. Use my blood to save him. If you can't, I swear I will kill myself right here in your hospital and die with him." Her suicidal intensity stunned everyone. The doctors and nurses went pale, seeing in her crazed, bloodshot eyes that she was not making an idle threat. "Quick, prepare for transfusion," the surgeon commanded. The procedure began immediately. Eleanor lay on a gurney next to Julian, watching her own blood flow through a clear tube into his pale, lifeless body. "More! Take more!" she kept yelling at the doctor. "I'm fine. You have to save him." The doctor, seeing her growing paler and the sweat beading on her forehead, issued a stern warning. "Ma'am, we are already past the safe limit. Any more, and your life will be in danger. Don't worry about me. Just take it." Eleanor gritted her teeth, her fists clenched. In the end, to pull Julian back from the brink of death, they took far more of Eleanor's blood than was safe. Just as Julian's vital signs finally began to stabilize, Eleanor, suffering from massive blood loss and extreme weakness, went into shock and collapsed outside the operating room. When she woke up, it was the next afternoon. The first words from her parched lips were to the translator at her bedside. How is he?" The translator quickly replied, "Ms. Thorne, Mr. Vance is out of immediate danger. It's a miracle." Hearing this, a faint, yet deeply contented smile touched Eleanor's pale lips, as if all the pain had been worth it. She struggled to sit up. I have to see him." "Ms. Thorne, don't move. You need to rest. You nearly died," the translator urged, trying to hold her down. But Eleanor's stubbornness was terrifying. Ignoring the doctor's vehement protests, she ripped the four from her hand and, dragging her fragile body, forced herself to Julian's intensive care unit. She couldn't go inside, so she stood at the glass window, watching him, unmoving, like a tireless guardian angel or a sinner in fervent penance, her eyes filled with a desperate, humble plea. A few days later, Julian woke from his coma. His injuries were severe, but his will to live and his youth pulled him through. He learned from the doctors and his classmates the full story of his rescue, including Eleanor's dramatic life-for-a-life transfusion. His friends spoke of her sacrifice with awe and emotion. Julian, however, listened with a blank face. His expression was as still as a deep, dark lake, without a single ripple. No gratitude, no emotion at all. Only a cold, profound indifference. When Eleanor learned he was awake, she gathered her courage and, with the doctor's reluctant permission, entered his room. The first thing she saw were those eyes. Julian, her voice was a hoarse whisper, full of cautious hope and barely contained emotion. How are you feeling? Does it still hurt? Julian watched her silently, her pale, gaunt face, the overwhelming regret and desperation in her eyes. After a long moment, he finally spoke. His voice was low from weakness, but every word was as clear and sharp as shattering ice. Eleanor, you saved my life. For that, I am grateful. A spark of hope ignited in Eleanor's eyes, but his next words plunged her into an icy abyss. But that gratitude does not cancel out a single thing you did to me in the past. Your blood. He paused, his gaze flicking to the needle marks on her arm, a flicker of undisguised revulsion in his eyes, flowing in my veins. It just makes me feel sick. The color drained from Eleanor's face. She swayed, nearly collapsing. Julian looked away from her and gestured to a friend, who took an envelope from a bag. Julian took it without looking inside and tossed it onto the blanket in front of her. The flap opened, revealing a thick wad of rubles. This is for the blood, calculated at the highest rate in Moscow, plus your medical expenses. We're even. Julian's voice was cold and final. Now I want you to disappear from my world. Forever. Even. Disappear. Eleanor repeated the words, her voice a hollow whisper. She stared at the mocking stack of money, and the last of her strength evaporated. With a soft thud, she collapsed to her knees beside his bed. This once proud woman, now completely broken, gripped the bed sheets, her forehead pressed against the cold metal frame. A choked, desperate, agonizing sob tore from her throat. I'm sorry, Julian. I'm so sorry. I know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Please. She chanted, I'm sorry, over and over, her body racked with gut-wrenching sobs. But on the bed, Julian simply closed his eyes and turned his head away, leaving her with nothing but his cold, silent rejection. Eleanor's grand gesture did not win back Julian's heart. It only left her severely weakened. She spent a long time recovering in Moscow, still trying to find ways to see him, only to be met with even colder refusals. To make matters worse, her prolonged, unsanctioned stay abroad, especially the drama surrounding her ex-husband, had attracted the attention and displeasure of the authorities back home. Official communications began arriving, urging her to return, each one more insistent than the last. And then, an unexpected person arrived in Moscow, Sebastian Cole. He had somehow found out where she was and had followed her. He couldn't accept being abandoned and was consumed with jealousy that Eleanor would risk her life for Julian. Afraid to confront Eleanor directly, he found out where Julian lived and cornered him one evening as he was returning from the conservatory. Julian Vance, you bastard. How could you? How could you make Eleanor almost die for you? Sebastian's face was twisted with hate, all his previous pretenses gone. Julian just looked at him, as if observing an insect. The look drove Sebastian into a frenzy. He began to brag, to confess everything. What are you so proud of? You think you've won? Let me tell you, if I hadn't held back in that hospital, you'd be dead. I would have pulled that oxygen tube right out. And the thumbtacks in your shoe? That was me. I couldn't stand the sight of you, so high and mighty. Why should you get everything? Eleanor only ever loved me. You were just a pathetic shield. He spewed out all his dark, twisted secrets. But he didn't notice that as soon as he started shouting, Julian had discreetly taken a miniature tape recorder, a rarity at the time, from his bag and pressed record. When Sebastian had finally exhausted his tirade, Julian spoke calmly. Are you finished? Sebastian froze. Julian held up the recorder. I have every word. Sebastian, you are on tape confessing to attempted murder and aggravated assault. The evidence is conclusive. The color drained from Sebastian's face. He realized he had walked into a trap. You tricked me. Julian ignored him and walked away. Back at his apartment, he made several copies of the tape. One he sent to the Moscow police, the others he sent back to the United States, to the National Police, and to his former unit, the Arts Command. The evidence was irrefutable. Sebastian was quickly arrested by the Moscow police and extradited. He was tried and convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to prison. The news destroyed his reputation completely. When Eleanor heard, she was packing her bag for her forced return home. She listened to the news without a flicker of emotion. Sebastian was a closed chapter, a stain on her past. He no longer mattered. Her mind was filled only with the image of Julian's cold eyes and his resolute departure. Finally, under pressure from her superiors and with her visa expiring, Eleanor, her body and heart broken, boarded a flight back home. As the plane took off, she looked out the window at the shrinking city of Moscow, her heart a desolate wasteland. She knew this departure was likely a final farewell. Time flowed on. A few years, a mere blip in the grand scheme of things, were enough to change destinies. Julian Vance graduated from the Moscow Conservatory with the highest honors. His extraordinary talent, unique artistic perspective, and relentless drive earned him a coveted position with the world-renowned Royal Symphony Orchestra of London. He toured the world's most prestigious venues, from the Bolshoi Theatre to the Paris Opera, from Lincoln Center to the Royal Opera House in London. His interpretations of classics like Swan Lake, Giselle, and The Sleeping Beauty won him universal acclaim. The Western media dubbed him the Maestro from the East. He had truly forged his own path to international stardom. He was confident, poised, and radiated a brilliance that commanded attention. He was everything he was meant to be. Eleanor, too, returned to her world. On the strength of her past accomplishments, she continued to rise through the military ranks. Another star was added to her shoulder, her power and influence greater than ever. To the world, she was still the formidable, unyielding General Thorne. But in private, she had become a ghost. She was a recluse, refusing all social engagements. She smoked and drank heavily, often spending hours just staring out the window into the night. She grew thin and gaunt, a permanent shadow of sorrow etched on her face. She secretly collected every article, poster, and photograph she could find of Julian, locking them away in a cabinet in her study that no one was ever allowed to open. They were her only reason for living, and the source of her unending torment. One year, the Royal Symphony Orchestra was invited to perform in Washington, D.C. When Eleanor heard the news, she pulled strings to get a single, inconspicuous ticket. On the night of the performance, she sat in a dark corner, dressed in plain clothes, the brim of her hat pulled low. When the stage lights came up and that familiar, yet achingly distant, figure appeared, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. On stage, Julian was magnificent. Dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, his every movement was precise and powerful, his entire being poured into the music. He was no longer the dependent vine. He was the sun, a source of his own brilliant light. He was so handsome, so dazzling, as if he had been born for this stage, for this adoration. From her seat in the darkness, Eleanor watched him, and silent, hot tears streamed down her face, blurring her vision. She bit down hard on her fist to keep from sobbing aloud. In that moment, she understood with devastating clarity what a treasure she had thrown away. After the performance, a desperate, obsessive madness seized her. She slipped through the crowds and, using her knowledge of the theater's layout, managed to intercept Julian in a secluded corridor leading to the parking garage. He was flanked by assistants and bodyguards. The years had given him an air of refined composure, making him seem even more untouchable. His security team immediately moved to block her. "Julian, it's me, Eleanor." She pushed past them, rushing to him. She was a shadow of her former self, her eyes sunken, filled with a desperate, almost unhinged plea. "Julian, look at me. I know I was wrong. I was so wrong. I haven't had a single day without regret. I'm not that person anymore. Without you, I think I'm going to die. Please come back. I'm begging you." She was rambling, reaching for his hand. Julian took a step back, avoiding her touch. He looked at her, at the woman who had brought him so much pain, who had defined his life for so long, and his eyes were a void. There was no hate, no love, not even a flicker of emotion. It was the look one gives a complete stranger. His lips parted. He spoke, each word clear, cold, and final, shattering the last of her delusions. "Eleanor," he said, "what you do with your life has nothing to do with me." He turned, and without another look, got into his waiting car. Eleanor stood frozen, as if her soul had been ripped from her body. She watched the black car disappear, taking with it the last glimmer of light in her life. Has nothing to do with me. Has nothing to do with me. She murmured, her eyes growing vacant, then wild. Suddenly, as if consumed by a final, overwhelming wave of despair, she let out a guttural, animalistic scream. She pulled the pistol she always carried, the symbol of her power, her past glory, from her belt, and, with a trembling hand, as if consumed by a final, overwhelming wave of despair, she let out a guttural, animalistic scream. She pulled the pistol she always carried, the symbol of her power, her past glory, from her belt, and, with a trembling hand, pressed it firmly to her temple. Julian! That desperate scream, the cold steel at her temple, did not end her suffering. In the split second before she pulled the trigger, the guards who had been ordered to watch over her from a distance sprang into action, tackling her, wrenching the gun from her hand. General, don't! In the struggle, the gun went off. Bang! The bullet tore through the ceiling. Eleanor collapsed to the floor, a broken heap, her eyes empty. Let me die, she whispered over and over. Just let me die. This failed suicide attempt was the final straw. It shattered what was left of her fragile psyche. She was forcibly admitted to the nation's top military sanatorium. The diagnosis was grim: severe clinical depression, complex PTSD, with extreme self-destructive tendencies and psychosis. Her physical health, ravaged by years of drinking and old injuries, was also failing. Deemed unfit for duty, she was forced into medical retirement. Her once glorious career was over. Her life became a cage. She was confined to a spacious but lifeless room in the sanatorium. She was unstable, one moment sobbing uncontrollably like a lost child, the next laughing with a wild, chilling despair. She refused most treatment, often talking to empty corners of the room as if someone were there. Julian, you're back. Are you cold? Let me get you some hot water. I'm sorry. It was my fault. I shouldn't have treated you like that. Look, the sun is so beautiful today, just like our wedding day. Sebastian, get away. Don't you dare hurt him. The staff could do little but sedate her, keeping her in a near-constant state of twilight sleep. The only time she was calm was when she was holding a worn, tattered photo album. It contained the only picture of her and Julian together, taken at a base party years ago. In the photo, Julian, in a simple shirt, was holding her hand, his eyes full of light, a happy smile on his face. And she, in her crisp uniform, looked proud and confident. It was the only thing she had managed to take from their old home. She guarded it jealously, caressing the image of Julian's face with her thin, trembling fingers, sometimes smiling, sometimes weeping, sometimes just staring into space for hours. When the military tried to reassign their old house, Eleanor, hearing the news, had her first violent outburst. She got a message to a former subordinate, her voice a raw scream. That house. No one touches it. Don't throw anything away. If anyone touches it, I'll haunt them from my grave. The house was sealed, left exactly as it was the day Julian left, a time capsule of her mad obsession, gathering dust in the forgotten corner of the base. In her rare moments of lucidity, she would ask for paper and pen. She would write letters addressed to my dearest husband Julian, rambling confessions and pleas, which she would then tear to shreds. Her world had collapsed, leaving only regret, madness, and the ghost of a man who would never return. While Eleanor languished in her sanatorium, on the other side of the world, Julian's life was reaching its dazzling zenith. With his masterful musicality, unique artistic sensibility, and profound understanding of modern classical music, he became one of the brightest stars in the international music scene. He was no longer Eleanor Thorne's husband. He was Julian Vance, the maestro from China. During a break in a global tour, he agreed to an in-depth interview with a prestigious international arts magazine. The interview took place in a chic cafe. Julian, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, was poised and confident. The haunted, wounded man of years past was gone, replaced by a man who was fully and comfortably himself. The interviewer, a sophisticated woman, asked, "Mr. Vance, your success is the stuff of legend. We understand you endured a very difficult marriage in your early years. Many believe that experience was a catalyst for your artistic growth. Can you speak about how your past has influenced you? What is the greatest motivation for your success?" Julian lifted his coffee cup, taking a small sip. He gazed out the window, as if looking back at a distant, faded memory. After a moment, he turned back to the journalist, a faint, calm smile on his lips. "Thank you for the question. Yes, experienced a very failed marriage. His tone was even devoid of resentment or sorrow, as if he were stating a fact about a stranger. For me, it was a long and painful nightmare. It nearly consumed all my passion and hope for life. The journalist listened intently, but Julian's tone shifted, a brilliant light shining in his eyes. It was that nightmare that finally woke me up. It taught me a fundamental truth. No one, man or woman, in any relationship, can ever afford to lose themselves. Your value is not dependent on anyone else. It must be defined and realized by you, and you alone. He paused, his voice gaining strength. As for my motivation, it does not come from that painful past, nor is it about proving anything to anyone. My motivation comes from the music itself, from my purest love for the art, from the desire to express beauty and life with my body and soul. It was music that gave me light in my darkest hour, and it is music that has allowed me to find my true self. After the interview, the journalist remarked with sincere admiration, "Mr. Vance, you are a true artist and an incredibly strong man." The article was syndicated worldwide to great acclaim. Julian's words about never losing oneself inspired countless people. In the sanatorium, an old television was playing the international news, the orderly having left it on to fill the silence. On the screen, a segment of Julian's interview was being shown, along with a stunning photo from his recent performance of Giselle at the Paris Opera. Eleanor, curled on the sofa with a vacant stare, happened to glance at the screen. The moment she saw that familiar, yet transformed, face, her dull eyes widened, and she began to tremble violently. She stared transfixed, listening to him calmly and powerfully describe a long nightmare, insisting one must never lose oneself, that his motivation is the music itself. Ha, 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 ha. A wild, crazed laugh erupted from her. She laughed so hard, she doubled over, tears streaming down her face. She pointed a trembling finger at the television and shouted to the empty room, "Did you hear that? He said it was a nightmare. He said I was his nightmare. Ha, ha, ha." And just as suddenly, the laughter twisted into a heart-wrenching, soul-tearing sob. She grabbed her own hair, burying her face in her knees, her body racked with the agonizing, animalistic wails of the damned. "He made it. He really made it. He doesn't need me. He never needed me." An orderly rushed in at the sound, saw her laughing and crying hysterically, and sighed. There was nothing to do but increase the dosage of her sedative once more. Time moved on, relentlessly. Eleanor's health deteriorated. The long-term depression had ravaged her immune system, and old injuries flared up, leaving her in constant pain. Her organs began to fail. She was transferred to the intensive care unit at the main military hospital, suffering from severe pneumonia and heart failure. The doctors did what they could, but she had no will to live. Her condition worsened daily. In her delirium, her withered hand would grasp at the air, her chapped lips moving, endlessly repeating the name that was seared into her soul. "Julian, Julian, I'm sorry. Come back." Her voice was a faint whisper, but the obsession was terrifying. The head physician shook his head and told a visiting representative from the military command, "Her body is shutting down. More importantly, she has no will to live. At this rate, it will only be a matter of days." The representative was somber. Despite her tragic end, Eleanor Thorne had once been a decorated hero. It seemed right to try, at least, to contact the one person she still clung to, however slim the chance. After navigating layers of bureaucracy, they managed, through diplomatic and cultural channels, to get a message to Julian Vance, who was in Vienna preparing for a major performance. The overseas call was connected. The voice on the other end was polite and distant. The representative explained the situation delicately. "Mr. Vance, General, Eleanor Thorne is critically ill. She's in a coma, and the doctors say she doesn't have much time left. In her delirium, she keeps calling your name. We were wondering if it might be possible." There was a long, heavy silence on the line, broken only by the faint static. It felt like an eternity. Finally, Julian's calm, unwavering voice returned, cool and detached, without a trace of personal emotion. "Thank you for informing me. Please ask the command to make the appropriate arrangements for her final affairs." He paused, his tone unchanging, as if discussing a logistical matter. "My marriage to Eleanor Thorne was dissolved many years ago. We have no legal or emotional connection. I wish her a speedy recovery, or perhaps peace." The words were perfunctory, a final, polite dismissal that was colder than any curse. The representative held the phone, listening to the dial tone, and let out a long, heavy sigh. He knew that was the final answer. The man Eleanor had once treated like dirt had, with his new life, buried the past so completely that not even a shred of pity remained. On the monitor, the line representing Eleanor's life grew weaker, flatter. The doctors had ceased all aggressive treatment. In her final moments, she experienced a brief, lucid clarity. She slowly opened her eyes, the madness gone, replaced by a strange, profound calm. Beneath it was a bottomless exhaustion. She turned her head, her gaze falling on the nurse at her bedside. Her lips moved, forming a barely audible whisper. Television. On. News. The nurse, seeing the almost pleading look in the dying woman's eyes, couldn't refuse. She turned on the TV. It was tuned to an international arts channel. A live report was being broadcast from the Vienna State Opera. On the magnificent stage, the symphony was reaching its crescendo. And at the center of it all, conducting, was Julian. Eleanor stared at the screen, at the man she could never touch again. A strange, twisted, yet somehow relieved smile formed on her emaciated face. A single, murky tear escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a path through the deep wrinkles. With her last breath, she whispered, so softly it was almost lost, but with perfect clarity, "That's good. You're flying. So high. So good." As the words faded, she closed her eyes, the broken smile frozen on her lips. On the heart monitor, the line screamed once, then went flat. At that exact moment, thousands of miles away in Vienna, the concert hall erupted in thunderous, sustained applause. All the lights were focused on the center of the stage. Julian Vance, leading the entire ensemble, took a deep, final bow. His forehead was beaded with sweat, his chest rising and falling gently, but his eyes were incredibly bright, calm, and resolute. As he straightened up, his gaze seemed to drift past the adoring crowd, toward the distant eastern horizon. There was nothing there. In his eyes, there was no joy, no sorrow, only the profound peace of a man who had weathered the storm and finally, truly, found his release. The story of an era had finally come to an end. One spent a lifetime in repentance, dying without forgiveness. The other broke free from his chains and danced among the stars, his own eternal constellation.